contributors and colleagues and our partners from Oak Bridge Publishing. Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you from Chintan Research Foundation, one of the newly established think tanks, but a prominent one. It is a distinct privilege to be here alongside my co-editor, Mr. Shishir Priyadarshi, President CRF, to introduce a project that has been both a labor of love and a rigorous academic pursuit. CRF's first edited volume, Perspectives from and Within India and its Neighbourhood. Neighbourhood first is not just a slogan in New Delhi, more so when most of the scholars and practitioners are talking and discussing about the allocations made in the union budget, the allocations of over 4,300 crores to immediate neighbors led by Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bangladesh, Myanmar. This simply underlines a very powerful idea that runs through this book, that development assistance, connectivity projects, and capacity building and security are today central to India's regional diplomacy. We began conceptualizing this volume, and our core intuition was that India's neighborhood looks very different depending on where you stand. For a policymaker in South Bloc, the region is mapped through budgets, projects, crises, and negotiations. But for our neighbors, India is experiencing in a more intimate and sometimes contradictory ways. As a security provider, a market, as a partner, a competitor, as a cultural reference point, and at times as an overbearing presence. It was important to us that any serious reflection on neighborhood first should hold these multiple vantage points together. This book, therefore, is structured in three parts that speak to each other. The first section brings together the seasoned ambassadors, Indian ambassadors, practitioners, and scholars who examine New Delhi's approach to each neighbor, from Nepal to Bhutan to Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Maldives, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, against the backdrop of a more fragmented global order and China's expanding presence in South Asia. The second section turns the lens, foregrounding voices from across the neighborhood who interrogate India's choices, its perceived big brother role, and the everyday politics of living next to a much larger power. The third section steps back to look at the cross-cutting themes, that is economic interdependence, connectivity, climate vulnerability, frontier security, maritime strategies, China's deep claws in the region, and more importantly for me, the role of women in shaping our regional future. What we find across these chapters is that a region is in a flux, but not without agency. The budget figures that many of us are now dissecting over the last 48 hours are in that sense not just numbers. They are the annual snapshot of how India is prioritizing this very uneven landscape. A higher allocation for Bhutan or Nepal, or a steady increase for Sri Lanka or Afghanistan, or cuts in Bangladesh or Myanmar. These all speak to the shifting assessment of risk, opportunity, and political comfort. They also raise the kind of question that this book attempts to do so. And as editors, we were keen on combining the diplomatic and strategic perspectives with grounded field-based insights from ambassadors, journalists, researchers across South Asia, and to understand how India's own choices are watched closely in the region. The central message of this book is that our engagement must be differentiated and context-specific. What works for Bhutan does not apply for Myanmar, and the strategies required for Bangladesh are distinct from those of Nepal. The contemporary geopolitics demands pragmatism, and our hope with this book was to encourage a more informed and pragmatic conversation. And today, our aim is to widen the conversation on this crucial topic. With these remarks, I would like to now welcome our president and co-editor of this book, Mr. Shishir Priyadarshi. With his vast experience as WTO director and former IS officer, he has served at senior positions in India, both at federal and sub-federal level, including the Cabinet Office. He has also written several articles and opinion pieces on geopolitical issues, and this edited book is an example of same. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Cchavi. Usually when she's around in office, I give her the floor. I don't need to say much, but then today is probably a completely a valid point. Cchavi said most of what I would have liked to share with all of you. Just a few additional points. I mean, one, really, why this issue? Chintan started less than a year ago. We're about 9 months away. And we've had the pleasure of attending or participating in a number of book discussions, book launches, some of the people, authors around the table too. And we too wanted to, have our first book there. And I must tell you, there were a lot of contenders. We've got a very strong climate change and energy transition vertical. Obviously, I have certain bit of partiality towards global economy and trade, having spent so many years there. But it very soon became evident in the discussions that we were having that while many things, require additional work, value addition, so it's true, but probably our neighborhood is probably the most challenging. And you'll probably hear much more about it from the gentleman to my left. But the fact is that the neighborhood is challenging. You know, when we were young, sir, and I've mentioned it to both these two friends of mine, I think there was this very wrong notion about 40, 50 years ago that foreign service is a very easy job to do. Trust me. Trust me, foreign policy is probably the most difficult thing as it exists today. Might be far easier to manage a district or a deputy commissioner or a commissioner than this, because it's changing on a perpetuity. You get up tomorrow morning and what you'd kind of felt could be the right path last evening is no longer true. But what Dr. Cchavi has said was really the most important point, that we wanted to also bring in perspectives, not just what we feel about there, but what is the view from the other side too. And in addition, we have a few thematic themes in this. So I'd be very happy if a few of you could skim through a few of the chapters, the ones that interest you, that'd be great. But I must be also very honest. Why did I agree? She's the expert. They didn't know. I'm not even partially there as she is. Why did I agree to be one of the editors? Because I wanted to learn. You know, if you are editing a book by force of compulsion, you're going to read every chapter. And I wanted to learn. I wanted to know so much more about the neighborhood that I did not know. And I tell you, it was a fascinating journey, a journey which went over quite a few months. Because this is the other thing. A chapter written by an author very quickly could actually, well, not become outdated, but may need revisions by the time someone who's put in a chapter a month later. So this is really, books like this need to be revised, need to be updated, and that's what I think is our value addition in terms of bringing it in. Let me also mention just one other point in addition to what Cchavi has said. Certainly, ever since we started the think tank, there have been numerous discussions on geopolitics, on the neighborhood in particularly, but broadly on foreign polity, and with friends that were willing to share their experiences with us. Whenever there was talk of the neighborhood, I found this, and this was, not necessarily that I said it each time, either there was a simplification of, the issue. That we are a large country, you're bound to have problems with smaller neighbors, no matter what you do, there will be nitpicking, no one's going to be happy about things ever. But there is far more in detail than this. And there is so much differentiation, not just between different countries, but when we started doing work, just depending on what part of, let's take Bangladesh as an example, what aspect of Bangladesh you were looking at it from India was so different than a certain other aspect, a certain other viewpoint from within that country. So it's been an amazing learning experience, but we are also very proud. We are very proud that Chintan, because when we set ourselves up, we wanted to add value, full stop. We genuinely didn't want to duplicate. We genuinely didn't want to tread on toes. We genuinely didn't want to, just do what others were doing. We just want to add value. And we are very happy to add value as a junior partner. So everyone that we collaborate with, we say, yes, you're the big guy. So we're very happy that you're all here. Let me take the pleasure of also introducing the panel that we have with us. Professor Sriram Cholia, who will be moderating the session. Sir, thank you so much. You bring, I know, decades of scholarship, geopolitics, global strategy. No better person than you. So, बहुत धन्यवाद आपने समय दिया. Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, you probably all know. You know, for 8 years he's led this, the MPIDSA, and very often the amount of work that they do does not get publicized. And it is kudos to him that, because unlike many of our events, etc., where you come up, then you prepare a little bit of press note briefing, they work straight on policy with the government. So thank you, Ambassador, you are here. I'd love to say Ambassador Puri, but that will be kind of an affront to this decades of friendship I have with Manjeev. He's an unbelievable speaker. He's an unbelievable flag bearer of what India does, and his experience both across South Asia and Europe is phenomenal. Dr. Arvind Gupta, who heads the Vivekananda International Foundation. Sir, no matter how many years and how many times I'll meet you, one bit of my thank you would also always be for my co-editor. I mean, that thank you would always remain for agreeing to let Cchavi come over and join us. I mean, she was with Vivekanand. She creates the bridge between you and me. But it's a bond of respect that only grows with time. So thank you for being here. Obviously, absolutely, as we spoke, not last, not least, is Professor Muni, one of the foremost scholars of Southeast Asia. And yes, I've already said a few words about my co-editor, Dr. Cchavi. Before I end, again, I'd really love, as I said, for you to read a few chapters as you go across. And if you do so, there are only 2 or 3 things that I would love it if you could take with you. One is clearly, which I've mentioned in a way, the complexity of dealing with the neighborhood. It's extremely complex. One size simply does not fit all, and even within one country, one size doesn't fit all. So it's extremely complex. The second is really the diversity and divergence. There is nothing linear about it, and you try and draw a linear line through the neighborhood, it won't work because the terrain is absolutely different. Third, despite everything that we may all read about things which are happening, things not going right, I think opportunities and possibilities, not just in the context of foreign policy, but when you read some of our thematic chapters about trade and investment across this, phenomenal. I mean, and it's only increasing. And I think that's the fourth. And finally, but fourth, very importantly, as comes out also in a lot of the writings, is responsibility. As India grows, and India is growing, there's a certain expectation and there's a certain responsibility that comes with it. So friends, the book obviously does not pretend to have any easy answers. We've just probably added more to the questions that are there. The region is complex, and evolving and changing. Dynamics is there. I mean, even we talk of the neighborhood, but China's footprints is clearly always there in every conversation. And these are the kind of thoughts we hope that it will come out in the discussion and later when you have your copies of the book with you. So once again, thank you so much. My apologies to a few who are still having to stand. I have attended a few meetings here, and even the well is a very comfortable place to sit in. So if at all you get tired by standing, you're more than welcome to here. With those words, can I hand over the floor to our moderator for the evening, Professor Cholia. Thank you.
Namaskar, everyone. Have we decided to do the unveiling later?
Okay, we can do that first.
Yeah.
I would request all the authors to please take the book in front of you for the unveiling and all the discussions and panels. Yes.
For the photo. Great. Thank you, Chintan Research Foundation. Thank you for hosting this panel. I think it's not an overstatement to say that most of us in India have strong views and opinions and feelings about the neighborhood, but not enough knowledge. I'm just happy with the sheer depth of the work that's been done in this book, and I've been able to thumb through it. Especially part 2, I strongly recommend it because it has views of scholars and thinkers from our neighborhood. Most of the countries are there, and what I did as a kind of a mental exercise was to map. So, for example, we have a chapter by Major General Binoj Basnath from the Nepalese military, which is chapter 9, and then we have a chapter on the same country from Ambassador Ranjit Rai. So what I did was I read our senior thinkers' view on Nepal, and then matched it with what his peer or counterpart in the same book was saying. And I will want to start on that note with the panel. Obviously there is a degree of positivity that we can always underline with the geography and history and culture and connectivity also, which seem to be binding us to the neighborhood. But you cannot but help see in this book itself and in perceptions in general that we have certain notions or red lines or certain do's and don'ts or certain likes and dislikes about neighbors, and they have their own perceptions or misperceptions of India. So, and these kind of books really help because they are connecting the two sides of the puzzle, so we get a fuller picture. But I wanted to bring in the panel on this particular aspect to start with a general one, which is the asymmetry and the this whole notion of India being an elder brother or a big brother, and of either being a benign or a benevolent player, or as meddling and interfering in the internal affairs of these countries. Right? These are the two narratives we keep hearing on both sides. So I'll request each of our panelists to talk a bit about this disjuncture. It will always exist, especially given the power gap, right? And I mean, no major power has a problem-free neighborhood, even the best of times. And right now, if you see what's happening in North America, north and south of the US border, you know what I'm talking about. But even generally, the Chinese have major issues with their immediate neighbors. All major powers have some degree of friction and this perception and counter-perception. So I would request each of our panelists, many of whom have actually served in the neighborhood and have represented India there and have seen them very closely and also written about these countries, to start at a general level first about the whole region and this gap, and how much of this exists, and where is the where are we missing the true picture in these two perceptions, counter perceptions. Obviously, we as Indians, most of us like to think that we have been benevolent and been really magnanimous and have done a lot for the neighbors, and we've tried to integrate them, but still the integration is weak, as we very well know in this region. And so let me start on that front. May I request Arvindji to start off and share his thoughts on this, about what our neighbors think about us and what we think about them, and the gap between these two narratives.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Let me first begin by thanking Priyadarshi for inviting me to this very important book discussion. And of course, Cchavi's introduction, very good introduction. And it's a great pleasure to share this panel with old friends. And Sujan and Manjeev on my right, thank you very much. I think they will provide probably better answers than I am, because he has served there
and Sujan is a very astute watcher. But I think the best answer probably will come from Professor Moni, the doyen of neighborhood studies, and I really acknowledge his presence here today. I'm meeting after a very long time. Moni साहब, इधर देख लीजिए जरा. नमस्कार. So, आप जरा फोड़ेंगे ना? तो Cchavi sent a mail, said that you could say whatever you want to, but maybe you could focus on part 2. So actually, you are giving me that maybe I'll take this few minutes to focus on part 2, but I want to also make a few general points. So let me just go to the part 2, which is a very interesting collection of articles. I think there are 6 or 7 of them, and each written by a non-Indian expert, except for Gulbin's, which has been included in this part. But so let me go country by country. The general point is that this so-called big brother attitude or elder brother or asymmetry, this is a fact. This is not going to go away. And I think Kautilya understood it better than many of us. Generally in the in not only concentric circles, but also what he talked about the neighborhood. He says that in his words, the neighbor is an Ari. It might become Mitra, and in the concentric circles things will change, but your fundamental point is that there is a certain adversarial character to the neighbors. And when the size differs, then this becomes even more complicated. So let's not worry too much about this. I think this is the structural, this is inbuilt, and you also mentioned it's there everywhere. So we have this peculiar, not so peculiar, it's I think quite a standard problem that with neighbors you'll have issues. How do you manage them? And in this case, of course, there is a power asymmetry, and this is growing. But it also has certain advantages. And the advantage today is that today, with India as the 4th largest economy and growing economy, now the neighbors are grudgingly accepting that India kahin hai. पहले ये नहीं था. India was weak, India was pushed around and so on, could be pushed around, but no longer the case. So I think now grudgingly they are accepting that India has that stature and they have to deal with India. But it is in the nature of things that they would hedge and they would balance and they will adopt various strategies. So that's the first point. The second point is that each neighbor, the geography is unique. So you have 2 of our neighbors, Sri Lanka and Maldives. They're part of Indian Ocean. And if you include their EEZs, they're very large countries, so significant countries. And they are, their interests are linked with us in the context of neighborhood first policy, but also now this Sagar and Mahasagar thing. So there is this overlap. You have Myanmar. This is, of course, also a Southeast Asian country, ASEAN country, and also a neighbor. Then, of course, you have Nepal, with this China, and also the free borders. So, and Pakistan, we are not going to talk about it because we'll get derailed. So there is this unique geographical features which are going to persist, which I think will play in our favor, because they are, in some sense, they're all inclined. Because gradient is towards India. So even with Chinese influence, etc., grows, the gradient being our side, I think, and cultural and historical bonds, etc. So we can take advantage of that, but we should not be complacent. Often we tend to become complacent. So geography is my second point. The third is that looking at these a few chapters that I was hurriedly read, I'm not read them very in detail, but every country has a certain way of looking at India, apart from these general factors. Like the Basnayat Sahib says that, India is an indispensable partner, and this is recognized. So I think indispensability, by varying degrees, I think is recognized. If you look at Bangladesh, that has, of course, a totally different, country in terms of its uniqueness. It's also unique, and we are in a very, very difficult spot there. And perhaps anti-Indianism is at its peak, and it is likely to grow further. Bangladesh might become another Pakistan, or is on way to become another Pakistan. So that is going to create a huge issue with us. But of course, that has not been discussed in that particular section, but I'm generally making a point. Sri Lanka, I was happy to see that there was a very clear mention by the author here that they see India as a spiritual home. And I think that's a very good, we hardly mention that here. We say Buddhism, etc., but they see us as a spiritual home. And I think that's an enduring thing. But there is also the other side of it, and that's word has been mentioned here, intrusive hegemon. So this balanced by that. So spiritual home, intrusive hegemon, and of course there are other many nuances of being an Indian Ocean country, being very close, and now of course AKD has come to power, and a party which was so anti-India and now has turned fairly positive, and this is because India came as a first responder, helped them in times of need. So they also see India as a friend, an ally. In fact, the word used is a protective ally, and but yet intrusive hegemon. So I think you could see the two trends there. Maldives also. Maldives is our relationship with Maldives has been on a roller coaster, and Muizu came with a very anti-India stance, Yamin before that, and now of course there is a course correction. But I think these countries are quite aware of their importance, their self-importance, because they are in the Indian Ocean. Maritime security is very important, and maritime security is such a issue where it's very difficult to get to the grips of it. The issues are very large, big, and the area is very large, and the issues are extremely complex. So they understand that India, has vulnerabilities, and they can play on them. And that's where the China factor also comes in a big way. And I think there's a very nice chapter by Barrett Lintner later, later, and he's identified that South Asia is not just South Asia. Today, your policies are not just neighborhood first policies. These have to be seen in conjunction with your Mahasagar policies as well, and in a much wider perspective. And this is a point that we have also been making for a very long time, that don't box India only as a South Asia country. And this is, of course, now well recognized. So South Asia is going to be impacted by much larger factors, the geopolitical factors, etc. And I think this is what the whole last few decades you see, they've all played the China card. And I think this is going to, though they are seeing the negative impact of this China card, also being particularly in Sri Lanka and various other countries. But this is there, and China's influence on South Asia has grown, and this is also impacting how these people in these countries, they see India, because they can very easily compare. So that when they put your BRI and you put your other connectivity projects and so on, so they tend to compare and so on. In fact, the Sri Lankan article says that India, they have used the word corrosive capitalism in relation to China. And that is where India is appreciated, because Indian aid and assistance has not been in that way. So I think India has a chance. India can today play a big role. But they see India also as it, in the case of Myanmar, for instance. The Myanmar article says that India is in a dilemma. India is so totally focused and narrowly focused on its security interests that it has aligned itself too closely with the and people and their concerns are being overlooked, and India should. So they understand the credibility and the moral standing of India, but they feel that India has to show a little more, a broader concern and deal with the ethnic groups or the people, etc., and go beyond just the entirely security things. The hint there, I think, is that India can play a role in the resolution of those conflicts, at least by talking to people, and we have been doing it also. So there is this expectation. So this thing comes out from all the chapters, that there is a far greater expectation from in these countries from India, that India would help them grow, etc. But at the same time, they also feel that India should be very sensitive. In the Sri Lankan article, it says that India, unlike India, should avoid the pitfall that the Chinese got into through this corrosive capitalism, and India should be open, transparent, and accountable when it comes to its aid, etc. That means they want India to do more and more, and yet be accountable and open. And the last point I want to make, this is about the visas. I think India has a tremendous visa power, but in most countries, including in today's Bangladesh, they feel that India has not used, or rather, India restricts visas. It happened in case of Afghanistan, in case of Bangladesh, and what is the other one? In Myanmar. And India has now done away with the FMR regime and started constructing this fence. All this, they feel that leads to greater anti-Indianism in these countries, because India is seen as not being sensitive when it comes to the visas. And most countries would feel, I think, that India should open out, and particularly this is the case of Nepal, that the student visas, etc., or students who were coming here, the scholarships which were being given, and they were being treated at par with Indians, that's all gone away. And more scholarships and more help in terms of entrepreneurship training and various other trainings. I think that's a great expectation. So I think these are the few ideas that I collected. And
yeah, lots of contradictions indeed, and complexity is the word that Shishirji also mentioned as the key theme of the book. Let me bring in Ambassador Manjeev Puri as well. Manjeevji, connectivity, there's a whole section with lots of very interesting chapters on the economic connectivity, and we have done a lot of work there, right? Like there's so many tangible projects linking us to all our neighbors across multimodal forms of connectivity, and we are doing a better job at it now than was the case maybe like 15-20 years ago. So, and in spite of that, my colleague Professor Shabana Baru has written a chapter on infrastructure diplomacy, and I caught a very interesting point she made, that there's a lot of connectivity but not sufficient integration. And and sometimes when the regimes collapse, or when there are these turbulence and volatility in our neighborhood, which has become more and more rampant, the connectivity suddenly either is severed or is undermined. Like with Afghanistan, the chapter by Raghav Sharma was talking about, how we're slowly making a return there. We have done so much there, right, in terms of multimodal connectivity. Now that is up in the air with Chabahar, the fate of Chabahar not known. So, is the physical and geographical connectivity that we do sufficient, or are we overrating it? Because we always say, a single market, a whole of South Asia, they're like rising middle class and everybody can benefit, and India should be the motor that lifts all the boats, the tide that lifts all the boats together, and therefore we are building the rail lines and the roadways and the electricity lines and the transmission, the inland waterways, this and that. All of it adds up to a lot of concrete things. But then, is it really leading to integration? Because the economic integration is still relatively half-baked, and we have not been able to expand the volumes, that much, in spite of I think Bangladesh is the only success story where at one point it became something like the fifth largest trading partner of India. But otherwise, as you know, it's the capacities on the other side are rather limited. So your thoughts on this whole connectivity, and whether is it physical and geographical connectivity, is that the be all and end all, and should we be trumpeting that, or are we missing some other element where we are not able to really win them over and bring them over to integrate fully into our supply chains and our markets and our economic processes?
Sriram, thank you very much. Really very nice of you, and I'll answer those questions. First, let me say a very big thank you to CRF, and more than that to Shishir. Shishir, thank you very much for embracing me as a friend, because I was getting very worried between two director generals sitting out here, one guy who doesn't have a job, man. And yet you introduced me very well कि कुछ करना चाहिए यहाँ पर. आप लोग हिंदी समझते हैं, सब लोग हाँ थोड़ा मजे में करते हैं, ठीक है, बहुत सीरियस बात हो रही है. जरा फंडामेंटल पॉइंट जरा समझें. आपने ये भी कहा कि foreign policy is a very difficult task. Man, I finally understood after being a IAS officer for 40 years. सर, हमारे जितने थर्ड सेक्रेटरी होते हैं उनको बहुत ज़्यादा दिक्कत होती है ना, यंग मैन, यू विल एग्री विद मी, कि हमारे वो SDM वगैरह जो लगे हुए हैं, सब लाल बत्ती, झंडा फंडा, 10 पुलिस वाले इधर उधर जा रहे हैं, हम लोग यहाँ पर अपने ही थैला लेके सुपरमार्केट जा रहे हैं, कोई हमारा पूछ नहीं रहा. जितने बढ़िया से बढ़िया देश में जाओ उतना ज़्यादा बंद आपकी सिचुएशन है. इंडियन एम्बेसडर अमेरिका तो खुद ही शॉपिंग करता है, बी वेरी केयरफुल. सिर्फ नेपाल में एम्बेसडर के लिए दूसरे लोग शॉपिंग करते हैं. ये फैक्ट्स हैं, रियलिटीज है ऑफ लाइफ. बट अंडरस्टैंड समथिंग वेरी फंडामेंटल. All civil servants in the world have a very cushy kind of scenario because they all represent sovereignty. But there's one civil service in every country in the world which doesn't represent sovereignty. Can you all take a guess? It's the diplomatic service. The other guy represents sovereignty. So आप हमेशा ऐसे रहते. अब यहाँ पर हम लोग लोगों को कहते हैं, किसी को दलाल कहते हैं, किसी को लॉबिस्ट कहते हैं, ये वो कहते हैं, और इनको थोड़ा सा ऐसे वैसे देखते हैं. बट कैन यू इमेजिन, ये तो सैंक्टिफाइड लॉबिस्ट है, अलाउड है, बट इसके बिना दुनिया नहीं चलती. This is the most important part. So Shishir, you're very right. Thank you very much for inviting us, guys. Maybe we have something to say about telling people कि असली दुनियादारी क्या है यार. ये छोटा सा झंडा पेपर लगा के तो हर आदमी अपने आप को समझता है कि मैं ही सब कुछ जानता हूँ यार. चाहे उसके बाद थोड़े से 60 साल के बाद पूछो कि वो जो रूल बनाया था उसको पढ़ा था, हाले खुद ही नहीं फिल कर पा रहे फॉर्म. ये फैक्ट्स है. ओके, ये याद रखिएगा. नेक्स्ट लिटिल पॉइंट, ये क्या चक्कर है? Why is it that chapter 1, the part 1 and part 2 actually read completely differently? Have you ever thought of it? Sriram, you started off very well by saying, everybody and his uncle and aunt think, we know everything about the neighborhood, every country we know. मैं नेपाल में रहा हूँ, वहाँ तो हर इंडियन को कहता है यार मेरे को सब कुछ पता है. पूछो यार, चलो ठीक है मान गए, आपसे हम क्या जिरा कर सकते हैं. लेकिन the reality is शायद कुछ भी नहीं पता. And I'm saying it very broadly. Obviously, लोगों को हर को थोड़ा बहुत पता. हमको पता पशुपतिनाथ है, ये है, वो है, टूरिज्म है, माउंट एवरेस्ट है, और कुछ पता है. आपको पता है कि यहाँ पर दिल्ली में ट्रैफिक सिग्नल पे आप पूछो तो किस तरह गाड़ियाँ खड़ी होती हैं. कभी आपने देखा है? ये अगर लाल बत्ती है तो हमारी गाड़ियाँ यूँ खड़ी होती हैं. सही है. नेपाल में किसी जगह में आप जाओ, गाड़ियाँ यूँ खड़ी होती हैं. कैन यू इमेजिन कितना डिफरेंस. मैं आप लोगों को ये चीज़ें, ये सिर्फ नेपाल नहीं, श्रीलंका में जाइए तो यही है. अब मैं पाकिस्तान गया तो मुझे बहुत साल हो गए, तो आई कांट से एनीथिंग अबाउट इट. बांग्लादेश में भी हमारे जैसा हाल है. भूटान, उसकी व्यवस्था बहुत अलग हो गई है. द पर कैपिटा इनकम इज सो ब्लडी हाई यार. व्हाट आर वी टॉकिंग अबाउट? इट इजंट ऑफ दिस काइंड ऑफ मेसी स्टफ. सो इज द केस विद श्रीलंका डिस्पाइट देयर प्रॉब्लम्स. So we need to understand that globalization has changed the terms of this engagement hugely. 30, 40 years back, or at least before this BRICS advent and all this business, India was the only place where these guys could do business. Literally, अब मैं पाकिस्तान, बांग्लादेश वगैरह को छोड़ देता हूँ, उसकी हिस्ट्री कुछ कॉम्प्लेक्स ही है. But you are the automatic place for doing business. Globalization has changed things completely. Their menu of options is tremendous. मैं आपको नेपाल का एग्जाम्पल देता हूँ because it's the most telling example. And just one digression. Arvind ji, thank you very much for mentioning this word hegemony. We all call it a bad word. अरे यार मैं नहीं कहता कि बहुत अच्छा वर्ड है, लेकिन hegemony is a fact of life. अगर मिस्टर डोनाल्ड ट्रंप किसी को और कहते हैं कि यू आर द 51st स्टेट, तो इट्स ओनली कनाडा. बाकियों को कहते हैं मैं आपको हड़प कर लूंगा, लेकिन 51st स्टेट नहीं कहते. You know, there's a kind of hegemonic thinking. And of course, what the man has done is something unbelievable, that for 200 years, white Canadians never thought there was any issue, but that we were different. And here the man has made them absolutely conscious that you are different. This is called identity politics. In our subcontinent, that has always been there. How many of you knew that in all the darbars which were held by the East India Company and the British Raj here in Delhi, never did the Nepalese delegations sit with the princes of India? Never. They always sat with foreign representatives. Do we understand what this means? हमारे लिए, अरे वो तो हमारे ही है, हमारे जैसा ही है. वो नहीं कहते कि नहीं है, वो कहते हैं हमें भी चिकन टिक्का बहुत अच्छा लगता है, हमें भी साड़ी पसंद है, हम भी ये सब चीज़ें करते हैं, टिक्का विक्का लगाते हैं, हिंदुइज्म है, ये वो है, लेकिन हम नेपाली हैं. ये चीज़ हम नहीं मानने के लिए तैयार. Now this is, you know, we are in the world of nation states. अरे यार, इस तरह मेरी रिश्तेदारी वगैरह नेपालियों के साथ शादी होती है. यहाँ पर अगर इस कमरे में कोई नेपाली है तो मेरे को भी थोड़ा सा देखना पड़ेगा, मैं वहाँ 3 साल रह के गया हूँ, कौन नेपाली है. आप लोगों को पता भी नहीं चलेगा. ये फैक्ट्स हैं. They are holding positions in India and it was legally allowed, it is still legally allowed. They have been an officer of the Major General rank in the Indian Army, legally allowed, nothing against it. So I'm not talking about the Agnipath scheme and so on and so forth. What I'm trying to say to you is, let's understand that as nation states in all these places, they have their own aspirations, they have their own way of thinking, we have our own, and hegemony is very normal as far as we are concerned, and they need to resist that hegemony. For many years, they didn't really have any option. And today, we keep talking about this big hawa called China. But it's geography. Isko to hum kya kar sakte hain? That they didn't have kshamta earlier. So, you know, it was all us. Suddenly, they've got kshamta. Kya kare? Do you know what the India-China trade figures are? Ye zara pata hai kisi ko? They are our largest trading partner. You know, that's the state of play. So, usko chhodiyega. This is the product of globalization. But I would leave one very strong thought with everyone, which is कि भाई ये तो ज्योग्राफी है, इसका हम क्या कर सकते हैं, लेकिन ये जो ज्योग्राफी हवा से आ रही है यहाँ साउथ एशिया में, इसका हम क्या करेंगे. अब नेपाल, बांग्लादेश एंड इवन श्रीलंका में जो भी हलचल हुई, we were not very happy with it, rightly so. Did we ever blame the Chinese on that? The answer is no. Who do we blame? जिनका ज़्यादा हाथ मिला जाता है. Because nation states, large nation states, have their own understandings of global hegemony. So I am a very old-fashioned believer in 2 things for India. One is एकला चलो रे in your neighborhood. बाकी दुनिया में ना चलो, बाकी दुनिया में अभी हमारी क्षमता नहीं है. यहाँ पर it must be Gurunath Rabindranath Tagore's एकला चलो रे. And no running after these friends and saying they got the act right and so on. I hope Professor Muni, you are listening to me. मैं हमेशा हार गया हूँ इस चीज़ में, लेकिन मैं कहता रहा हूँ हमेशा. The other thing is, let us also recognize and understand the changes that globalization has brought through. Insofar as Nepal is concerned, you know, it's an expression that I use very often, and please pardon me for that, that it's no longer Banaras, it's Bengaluru. That's what interests the Nepalis. You know, when I passed out of school, we didn't have any money. We had never heard of the word passport. तो फतूर चढ़ गया कि यार हमने किसी फॉरेन कंट्री जाना है. यार 5-10 लोगों से पूछा, किसी को कुछ पता ही नहीं था क्या करें. तो फाइनली किसी ने कहा नहीं नेपाल जा सकते हो, पासपोर्ट की जरूरत नहीं है. तो 500-400 रुपए लिए, दिल्ली से ट्रेन में बैठ गए. हमें ये भी नहीं पता था कि नेपाल जाने का रास्ता क्या. सो वी फाइनली रीच, आई थिंक बनारस और पटना और समवेयर, और किसी ने कहा यार अगर 100 रुपए हैं तो टिकट मिलता है, काठमांडू जा सकते हैं. देयर नो फ्लाइट्स टू पटना. You can't operate to that airport. The Banaras flight with great difficulty, when I was ambassador there, we started it, I'm told they've cut it off. Because there's no traffic. Do you know which is the most profitable sector for Nepal Airlines? It's not Delhi and it's not Bombay. It's Bengaluru. These are the realities in our own country. And yet we are all the time hunting Banaras in Kathmandu. We must change, we must understand. No one says the Banaras has gone away. It's going to always remain there, yaar. How are you going to run away from it? कि वो लोगों को अपने पुरखों के बारे में नहीं पता, सबको पता. And this is the very important element for us to realize the changing India, the hugely changing India. We're a technology powerhouse. We also have money. So talking in terms of trade, Yeah, trade and connectivity. Look, more than 2/3 of Nepalese exports come to India. और कहाँ जाएंगे? There's no other place that can buy this. Insofar as connectivity is concerned, I'll share with you just my example. And you mentioned this thing, kabhi rok dete hain. Now I don't want to get into that big word called the B word, which propelled somebody to decide that this character who has never served in Nepal should be sent as India's ambassador to Nepal. ठीक है, तो 2015 अगर आप मेरे कोई गूगल करें तो आपको पता चल जाएगा. वो एक पूरी जनरेशन जो लोग याद रखेंगे उसको. Of course they do. What else do you want them to call it? You can't say did a great friendly act towards us. So ये ऐसे ही होता. But countries do it because these are your national requirements, and very often the long term etc. is trumped by the immediate. I just want it done now. अभी चाहिए, तो नहीं मानेगा तो मैं करूँगा, बाद में देखा जाएगा क्या होता है. ये ऐसे होता. No issues with that. I just want to tell you. So this blockade thing, what was the big issue? It's oil. Yeah, we built the first pipeline in South Asia from India to Nepal. अब उसके बाद ये blockade तो नहीं हो सकता, ठीक है ना? क्योंकि अगर in these blockades, what do? You try to pretend there's no blockade, and that और गाड़ी पंचर हो गई, बारिश हो गई, खड्डा आ गया, टूट गया. Nobody, because you say there's a blockade, you're contravening WTO, UN rules and all. There are all kinds of implications to all that. And India is still not in a position to say two fingers to international law. We don't. We want to be part of a rules-based order. So with the pipeline, that issue is gone. And I want to tell you something very nice. When this pipeline was inaugurated, KP Sharma Oli, for all our issues with him, at the inauguration, virtually done inauguration in Kathmandu, was sitting next to me. And he looked at me and said, "Hey, Ambassador Sahab, you guys have done a signal favor. Can you imagine कि नेपाल में तेल 2 रुपए पर लीटर कम हो गया? इससे ज़्यादा कोई इंटरेस्टिंग चीज़ हो सकती है? All these integrated checkposts that we are opening, all these connectivity things we are doing, in the modern world this is required. So Shriram 50 years back actually connectivity was excellent. जो मर्जी जिसको चाहिए था सब घूमता फिरता था. Actually, due to our national security interests, we put up a lot of barriers. And rightly so. Nothing against it. Rightly so. But in terms of the modern world, you also have to find ways and means that you do all this, but you don't hinder trade and movement of people. Because it's people that result in your best connectivity with your neighborhood. I use this word hegemony, isn't it? Madam, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਓ ਜੀ. Please, no, please come here. भाई, former Minister of External Affairs, please come here. नहीं, तो ਇੱਥੇ सीट पई हुई है, ਤੁਸੀਂ आओ तो सही. And are you still in Lodi Colony, ma'am? If you're not there, we still welcome you here. Yeah. Very nice to see you, ma'am. She was just across the road. It's perfectly fine. Ma'am, you are the chairperson. How can you take anybody's seat? Yeah. Pradeep, thank you, Karo. So, no, thanks. So, therefore, with all of them, Nepal, Maldives, Sri Lanka, everyone. Afghanistan is a bit of a special case. You have no, legally speaking, we have a border with Afghanistan. Do any of you know that? Yeah, but you are a strategic affairs and foreign policy expert. I want to tell you, a young man in my batch in 1982, when we joined service, we called on the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. One of our colleagues has done a PhD from JNU. He asked this question of Indira Gandhi. The Joint Secretary sitting with us almost fell off his chair. But she knew the answer. Thank God for it. None of us knew. The Joint Secretary had no idea, had never heard of it. And my God, he was sweating like mad. Afterwards, he came out, he said, "Yaar, unhone sambhal liya." ऐसे ही होता. So nobody would know that. But we don't have a land corridor anyway. So the connectivity business is very complex in this Chabar. We've got to derail ourselves from India and the neighborhood and talk in terms of India and geopolitics. So we leave that out. And Pakistan also, let's leave it out. It has other. But fundamentally speaking, as Dr. Arvind Gupta very rightly said, अरे भाई big brother तो है ही, big brother उसको आप elder brother कहो, जो भी कहो, there's an asymmetry in terms of the size of your economy, where you are going in the world, that you are a member of the G20, that you are an aspirant for the permanent seat in the Security Council, etc., and the others. At best, they are stallers to those processes. At best, they can't hope for anything else. So therefore, there will be these particular things. Even the smaller guys will say, यार मुझे क्या फायदा मिलता कि ये बंदा आगे जाएगा. It doesn't work like this. Only when the biggies as well as the smallies think that having you inside the tent is better than having you outside, do things move forward. That's the nature of the way international affairs and all of these particular things also. You know, these cookies crumble. So all I'll say this is, connectivity, keeping up the people's links is not a matter of choice. It's a matter of necessity and something that is particularly important and we should remain focused on, no matter the daily hiccups, problems, and the very fact that somebody else may misuse it. Doesn't matter. Do it in your own interest. It's important for keeping up the greatest link that we have with the people with South Asia, which is at the level of people. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's like a long-term investment we have to make. Good point, Ambassador Puri. Even if there are regime changes and so-called anti-India governments that come in, let me bring in Ambassador Chinoy on this, especially on this internal instability. Ambassador Chinoy, last 5 years, since 2020, we are seeing they're just falling like 9 pins. Most of these neighboring countries are highly volatile. Internal politics is in total turmoil there. So, as a stable and a big country, which is India, with a lot of economic dynamism, sometimes people say India lost and China won in this country or that country, and people make these momentary judgments. What should we be doing, Ambassador Chinoy, to stabilize the neighborhood? Or maybe is that too much to ask for? I mean, some people say we should just exercise restraint and let those things play out in those countries, and through their internal churning, they will finally find their way. But in the case of Sri Lanka, for example, we did a bailout. Now, de facto, it was a bailout of $4 billion or so, right? So, in some cases, we've actually stabilized them through direct financial infusion and also by working with different actors on the ground in those countries. So, how do we deal with the instability complex in our neighborhood? It's not been addressed sufficiently in the book because I think some of these collapses and regimes have happened in the last 1.5 years, and maybe our scholars need more time to analyze these. We are still taking a long-term view in this, but the current moment where the neighborhood is in flames, do we go out with a fire engine and douse the fires, or do we say let it play out and we'll just be a bystander, or is there somewhere in between, between the two ends of the spectrum, where we are not full bystanders nor are we meddling, but doing something to stabilize the region?
Thank you very much, and congratulations to CRF, the co-editors and the authors, for this wonderful book. I must confess I have yet to read it in its entirety, but after that very granular exposition by my dear colleagues, I want to address your question with a larger overhang, a broad conceptual overhang as well. Now, we all know, I think it was Mr. Vajpayee also who repeated that you can choose your friends but not your neighbors. And so intrinsic in this is a huge challenge for any country, and India is no exception. The other very important point here is that in dealing with neighbors, and especially smaller neighbors, it's always a dilemma. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And there'll always be vested interests and parties that may welcome you, and many may oppose you as well. There will always be interference by others. And this brings me to the larger issue of Kautilya and Arthashastra, which my friend Arvind Gupta had referred to. And if you look at Kautilya's Arthashastra, it's very clear that neighbors are generally seen as potential adversaries. It's not necessarily etched in Kautilya's Arthashastra that neighbors are necessarily friendly. In fact, they are potential adversaries from the very word go. And this is something which must inform our policy and decision making at the best of times. And if we look at the mandala system, and especially at the whole concept of Chakravartin, in that there is implicit a requirement to dominate. Without domination of a neighborhood, you cannot emerge as Chakravartin or King of Kings or Emperor. In some ways, one can say that the Chinese seem to be implementing some of the key concepts of the Arthashastra. Xi Jinping in particular and his predecessors have always spoken about and implemented this divide and rule policy on the periphery. And they have this whole concept of being the middle kingdom. So I think there is something that one can learn there from how China has gone about it. If you look at the Americans and how they've handled neighborhoods, then it is essentially a question of not resolving problems but overwhelming problems. So one can say that the US example is that if there are neighborhood problems, you simply overwhelm those problems. The other way of looking at it is that you try and resolve them. And I think India has done well to try and resolve problems, not to overwhelm them. It is also not a case here of our being able to overwhelm problems. We have not been able to overwhelm, for example, the challenges that we face on our boundaries, whether the northern boundaries or the western boundaries. We have not been able to fully overwhelm or contain the threat of terrorism that emanates from the neighborhood. And therefore it is important that we stick to the non-American model of trying to work with our neighbors. It's also a fact that today globalization has resulted in what I might call expanding neighborhoods on the one hand, and also imploding neighborhoods on the other hand. And I'll try to explain briefly what I mean by this. The whole burgeoning of trade, technology flows, even threats like terrorism, these have actually imploded neighborhoods and in a sense expanded neighborhoods. So all neighborhoods, whether in our part of the world or in East Asia, and as Trump has also brought out in America's National Security Strategy 2025, when he speaks of keeping out other powers from the Western Hemisphere, he's basically referring to this concept of expanding neighborhoods, imploding neighborhoods, where it's very difficult to, in fact, keep away other powers. Connectivity has also, resulted in this kind of an implosion of neighborhoods. And so neighborhoods, therefore, can either be shared and contested, or shared and collaborative. But shared they are, and there is not much of a choice. For example, when we look at China's expansion into the Indian Ocean or in South Asia, we are looking at this whole concept, emerging concept of a shared but contested neighborhood. It could well have been collaborative, but to have a shared and collaborative neighborhood in this day and age, conceptually, there must be transparency in terms of motivations and intentions. This is lacking insofar as China is concerned. We have not been able to see China's motivations, nor has China expressed its intentions very well as it spills over as a major power into regions beyond their traditional region. Now, here I would like to say that India faces two major challenges. It's certainly not me. There are two major challenges for India in the neighborhood. The first is a neighbor, Pakistan, that is trying to exit the neighborhood. Pakistan has always tried to deny its South Asian identity. It has an identity crisis which continues till this day. It has tried to pass itself off sometimes as an Arab nation, sometimes as a West Asian nation, sometimes as a Central Asian nation. And who was it that said, I think it was Wahid-uz-Zaman, the Pakistani scholar, historian, who had said, God forbid, if Turkey and Iran forsake Islam, they will still remain Turkey and Iran. If Pakistan forsakes Islam, it will not remain Pakistan. So this identity crisis that Pakistan has created a problem. We have this dilemma of a South Asian country trying to exit the neighborhood. On the other hand, we have another dilemma, another challenge, where we have a non-South Asian country called China that is trying to impose itself and enter the region. So there is this duality which is unique currently to the challenges faced by India. Now, why is it that China thinks it can claim itself to be a South Asian neighbor of ours? In fact, in October of 2025, I had led the India-China Track 2 dialogue on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties. And I was quite bemused to hear from Chinese scholars that China is actually a South Asian country because it has two large provinces, Tibet and Xinjiang, which abut South Asia. And South Asian countries, in fact, cooperate with these two neighboring provinces of China, and therefore it is a South Asian country. So such is the logic today, which we will have to keep in mind. May I also mention that my view, personal view of a neighborhood is, as I said at the very beginning, it's not the American prism through which I believe we should operate in our neighborhood. We should not be trying to overwhelm problems, but we should be trying to resolve them and look at collaboration. We should look at this as a shared, collaborative and cooperative space. On the spectrum of conflict, if you're looking at, for example, cooperation, collaboration, competition, conflict and combat, 5 C's of the spectrum of conflict, I would say that with neighbors that are smaller in our immediate neighborhood, South Asia, we should remain on the cooperation and collaboration spectrum to the extent possible. Even with a neighbor like China, which has been a traditional adversary, poses many challenges to us, I believe personally that we should try to avoid going beyond the competition scale. In other words, we need not descend into conflict and eventual combat. And we have to, that's what diplomats are for, that's what political leadership is for. Having said that, let me say also that without strength, you cannot really have any kind of profile in a neighborhood. And one learns again from the Arthashastra, it wisely suggests that when a state has an army, allies remain friendly, and even the enemy becomes friendlier. It's very true. Maintaining strong defense forces and engaging in defense diplomacy are therefore, in my view, two sides of the same coin. And that is why Theodore Roosevelt had also said that speak softly but carry a big stick. And more relevantly, George Kennan also said, if I may take another 2 minutes so that I finish what I have to say, that George Kennan had said that you have no idea how much it contributes to the general politeness and pleasantries in diplomacy when you have a little quiet armed force in the background. Now, this is generally true of any neighborhood. I think it is especially true of our neighborhood, and we must stick to that. A little, word or two on Sagar to Mahasagar. As I said, neighborhoods are being redefined, reinterpreted. In a sense, they are shared neighborhoods today. And India is not limited to South Asia as its neighborhood. India also has an expanding neighborhood, and it's, kind of in a way conceptualized by the awesome, reach of its soft power around the world. There is a constituency out there which we can consider our neighborhood. More than that, we have in physical terms reinterpreted, our ideational concepts like Sagar to Mahasagar, and Mahasagar takes you to other regions straight away. I do believe that the armed forces of India and some of their exceptional expeditionary capabilities, peacetime capabilities, especially the Indian Navy, can be used to actually consolidate this neighborhood concept, the expanded neighborhood concept under Mahasagar. Naval ships, for example, carry a lot of billets and bricks, disaster management bricks on board at all times. Even without disasters, they carry these things. And they have, great capacity to carry on board material, equipment. They have always a huge team of various trades and craftsmen on board, from plumbers to carpenters to welders, etc. And so therefore, when India is looking at giving lines of credit, implementing low cost, high impact projects around the world, especially island and maritime countries, the Indian Navy's capabilities can be used to deliver some of these projects in a time bound manner through friendly port visits. When I was ambassador in Japan, I found that as ambassador to the Republic of Marshall Islands, one naval ship visit for 3 days did more for me than what I could do through my own resources from the Ministry of External Affairs in 3 years. Because the sailors just stepped out, and we had worked out a program. They went and painted all the schools there. They repaired whatever had to be done. They can deliver, solar refrigeration projects. They can deliver street lighting projects. Small bridges can be built overnight. So India must think in different ways, out-of-box thinking in terms of what we seek to deliver. My last 3 points very briefly are that, all rising powers require a degree of regional consensus on their rise, and India is no exception. India must keep this in mind when formulating its policy. We have seen from others in the region, in the case of China, that even adversaries like Vietnam, Japan, and some others who are, apprehensive about China's rise, they have bilateral issues, but they have a stake in China's rise. In fact, China's rise means prosperity for them, whether it is Hanoi or whether it is Tokyo. And so, when is it that we can build such stakes in our neighborhood where, despite problems, despite having boundary issues, etc., or any other issues, we get our neighbors to see their stake and their future and prosperity in our rise? And the second one is that in South Asia, you are aware, Professor, that there is very little intra-South Asian trade. The last point I'll make, and I'll end on that, is spheres of influence are staging a comeback of sorts. It is a mug's game to try and replicate what President Trump is doing with the Donroe doctrine. I still believe that the American model of overwhelming problems in the neighborhood or trying to implement, an exclusive zone for themselves is not something we should be looking at. Even the Chinese have failed in their region, in the South China Sea, East China Sea, in our region, in the Indian Ocean. There are traditional major powers, and they've been present a long time. China is an exception. It's not been around for 600 years, not since the time of Zheng He. It's a different matter that they claim that because Zheng He came 600 years ago, and because we have emerged as the second largest economy and the largest trading power in the world, we now have a right to be in the Indian Ocean without transparency. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Chinoy. Yeah, I mean, there's much to be to mull over because clearly this is, how the neighborhood, consolidates and stabilizes remains a major challenge for India. But we will see. Maybe we can get some audience reactions also on the question of how much India should intervene and in what forms. Last but not least, let me bring in Professor Muni. Professor Muni, this book has highlighted that one of the backdrop factors is great power rivalry and intensifying great power rivalry in our backyard. So China-US rivalry is there, and we can see that ideally we would have expected that India-US comprehensive global strategic partnership will mean that India and the United States will combine and join hands to push back the Chinese, intrusions, which Ambassador Chinoy is talking about in our backyard. But that hasn't happened, and that is one of the big puzzles, right? I mean, if India and the United States are meant to counterbalance Chinese expansionism, why is it not happening in our neighborhood? And some of the chapters do refer to, in fact, we are collaborating better with Japan in our neighborhood, jointly doing projects in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and so on. But we are not able to do it with the US. And on most of the questions, the controversial ones, like Bangladesh, our view has been that, there was just no alignment between India and the US. So this great power rivalry, is it actually benefiting us or actually in a way harming us? I mean, that's I request you to put our neighborhood first and all of it in the larger context of China-US rivalry. And why is it that India-US are not able to team up and become a strong tag team?
Thank you, Professor Julia. I will follow your command, but I'll take some other points as well. First of all, to begin with, I am grateful to Chintan Foundation for having me on this such a distinguished panel. So heavyweight ambassadors are around. I mean, they have the experience on the ground. We guys are often limited only to the library and not much. Therefore, you have given us a lot of insights, and let me learn from those insights and still say what we learn from library. To learning from library, first of all, I'll very humbly, politely disagree slightly with Julia Saab and also my very dear friend Arvind Gupta. don't use the elder word and elder brother and big brother together. In my class, I teach elder brother and big brother are in contrast to each other. Big brother is I don't want to use a bad word, it is an American concept. We never knew it unless Americans started writing that India is behaving as a big brother. Big brother in any United States mall is a dandawala policeman type of a thing who sits with 6 TV screens and watches who is doing wrong where. And wherever wrong is being done, he goes and beats them and silences them. That is a big brother. The Americans started writing. Even Indians who have settled in America started writing. They are all friends, I don't want to name them. And we learned that big brother concept applying for India. All our students in classrooms, we started reading those, we started teaching those. Elder brother is in Gujarati Mota Bhai, who is your friend, who is your supporter, who will hold you when you are in a trouble, and he will slap you if you do something wrong. And we have done both to all our neighbors. And for the last almost 10 years, I have been teaching in my classes, don't use big brother, use elder brother. Fair enough. You can find fault with an elder brother. Sometimes elder and younger brothers part away, different matter. But the concept is not of a big brother which we must be employing, number one. Number two, with very humbly disagree with Ambassador Chinoy of Kautilya's Neighbourhood being adversaries. We were known as Indian subcontinent. There was no South Asia. The South Asia was created by imposing Westphalian sovereignty political system on a civilizational homogeneity. We were divided on civilization, we were divided on culture, we were divided on our eating habits, we were dividing on our dressing codes. It's a very unnatural neighborhood. It's not a neighborhood. We are all together. Once I was talking in India International Center under down the lawns when I was very young and learning it. Haksar Saab was sitting there. And I said the same thing again and again. Why we are interfering. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? He said, Muni, chup ho ja. And he said, the neighbors and India are lodged into each other's intestines. A bit of India exists in every neighborhood. And a bit of neighborhood exists in India everywhere. We are already interfering with each other. We are already messed up with each other. That's not a neighborhood which Kautilya had in his mind. The Kautilya had China kind of a neighborhood in his mind. Probably he had Iran, probably he had Russia, whatever. So my submission would be, and please correct me if my understanding is wrong, that we are civilizationally one homogeneous unit, which has unfortunately, because of the contingencies of the global power, were converted into neighborhood. We are all very, very natural. 2-3 other points. I'll come to your point, Professor Chulia, in a short while. It's an excellent book, sir. As a teacher of South Asian studies, it's a must-read for every student. Your 3 sections are wonderful. They are very well coordinated. More than that, it has a lot of authentic data, which is very useful for reference to the students. And it is very educating. I only wish, Cchavi, that some of your authors, contributors, would have referred to Bhasin. I pay my tributes to him, who has done such an authentic work, and is hardly quoted in your book. Very original documents he has produced. I wish some of the contributors had paid some tribute to him. But then there are things which I say the book should have had. To begin with, The book should have had a policy, a chapter on India's policy. Sir, I saw the concept note, Cchavi, and Shishir, and I quote you where you said, India's policy is neither uniform nor static, but highly contextual and adaptive. Yes, I agree with you. But this is within a wider frame of policy. What you are talking is of relations. The wider frame of policy was, and it has evolved from Nehru's time. And I don't want to go into history because your book is emphasizing on the neighborhood first concept it is started with. But that policy, and I'm very fond of my own name, so I use the synonym, the abbreviations of my name, SD, and I would say India's policy has been double S, double D. Double S is security and stability. Double D is diplomacy and development. These are the four cornerstones of India's policy towards neighbors. And there is a priority. Finish it up? I am done. No, I am done. अरे साहब हर एक आदमी 20 मिनट बोला है, आप मुझे 5 मिनट 10 मिनट भी नहीं बोलने. No, I am fine because I read from forward to the afterwards. And I've used notes. Therefore, anyway, I think there should have been one policy. And the second point, and then I'll come to your last point. The second point is India's neighborhood first. Again, the contributors have done an excellent job of saying what India has been doing. Connectivity, the first responder, any crisis, we have gone there and tried to cope with them. All the positive factors, and I am fully with it. It's the most dynamic policy, most active policy, where prime ministers had not gone for years. Prime Minister Modi has demonstrated that he has done. But it has another side. And the another side arises out of a question that despite all that we have done, which Professor Chulia raised in the first point, why it is that neighbors are not responding to our expectations. Why it is so. And there are huge examples of that. It's not only anti-India nationalism. Two of the Sri Lankan prime ministers blamed India that we are assassinating them. I mean, this is the worst kind of a situation which has happened. And there are so many other allegations of interference and whatnot which the neighbors have said. Why have they done and must have looked at some of these factors, which I am afraid the book doesn't look at it. Our diplomacy and Ambassador Puri, please, largely elite-based. We have been bothered like on the chessboard with the queens and the bishops. That's why in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, we didn't know that youngsters are coming up in this aspect. We were all taken by a surprise, everywhere. Because we had no roots in understanding how these countries are changing. The social dynamics is changing. 42.5% is the population of Gen Z in Nepal. How do you expect? We have changed. We still now, even yesterday I was in a seminar on Nepal, Roti Beti. Forget about Roti Beti. That 29-year-old chap doesn't care about Roti Beti. He wants his job. He wants his profession. He wants education. He is self-confident. He is aspirant. And he wants India to respond to that. And we have not been able to do that, despite all the money which we have sunk there. And that's why you have all kind of, I have a detailed on, and I've written on this, so if anybody gets any time, can look at it. Lastly, this kind of a contrast with the, and the lastly on the question of China, US, India, there was a time when we told US, Nehru spoke in Kathmandu saying that if the US thinks that by cultivating Pakistan and Nepal it can isolate us, it is grossly mistaken. We never wanted an external influence to be there in our periphery. Today we have reached a situation where we are willing to not only asking for collaboration with the US and Japan, because somewhere we have come to this realization, and please pull my ears if I am wrong, that we have been convinced that we alone cannot cope with the Chinese in our neighborhood. So we need some support. And why it is so? And in seeking that support is fine, but then we cannot really pressurize our neighbors to say what to do and what not to do in relation to China, which we do. BRI. I mean, I have a view on how we could have tackled BRI, forget about it. The government thinks always best. They have done whatever they have done. But if we are having 100 billion more trade with the Chinese, if we want their investment, we want their technology, how the hell we can tell our neighbors not to have the engagement and same kind of a relationship with China? Ranjit is quite correct in his paper, in his chapter he writes that we need to recalibrate our policy towards neighbors in relation to China. China has strong stakes. Ambassador Chinoy is absolutely correct when he says that Xinjiang and Tibet is the vulnerable periphery of the Chinese. And in order to stabilize it, to develop it, they need the support of neighbors of these vulnerable peripheries, which is nobody else but South Asia. So they will come in South Asia. And they will stay in South Asia. There was a time when the Chinese did not have the capability to stretch themselves, and therefore they were willing to use only as a counterbalancing power to India. Whenever the neighbors invited, they said, yes, 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 we are with your sovereignty. No longer. Today, if Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, everybody says Chinese get out, they won't get out. They have stakes. The problem lies with our China policy. How are we looking at China policy? Let us stop teaching them how to deal with China. Let us learn and redo our board paper to find out how should we deal with China. That's why we have got the US. Last point on US. There are three major changes which have taken place in South Asia recently: Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. India and the US were on the same page on Sri Lanka. India and the US had total contrast on Bangladesh. India and US were on the same page so far as bidding goodbye to the Oli regime in Nepal was concerned. But no longer. We don't want US to decide what Nepal's future should be. So it's not a blind collaboration with them. The old heritage of keeping the big influences out is there, but it has been moderated, adjusted, as you say in your policy in terms of relations, depending upon the situation. And that's how you should look at collaborations which we are having with US or Japan in order to deal with China.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Muni. It's a very comprehensive response. I think we are almost out of time, but Meenakshi ji is here and she has written an afterword to this book. And I want to take up ma'am on that. Ma'am, you're talking about our capacities and our strengths to be able to shape the neighborhood. And clearly, as India becomes a bigger and bigger power, we would expect that we would have more means and abilities and, to persuade or even in some cases to compel the neighbors to respect our red lines and to come along with us. So this confidence that you have exuded, about India having the capacity to be able to shape the neighborhood, please tell us more about it, because in the usual media reactions is very momentary and knee-jerk. If a regime falls, then they say we lost. And if a regime, if they come around, then they say now India has won. Or they don't even bother about India winning. It's usually about India losing, right? And that's because that makes headlines. So, but you are talking about something more structural and fundamental, because our economy is growing. We are, in a way, the asymmetry is increasing. We are becoming even more powerful vis-a-vis these smaller neighbors. But it also means with greater power, we have more responsibility, and we can also do many wonderful things for our neighbors, which we could not have the means or the resources 20 or 30 or 50 years ago, right? So that way, India is becoming a more capable, maybe a steward of the whole region, as you are saying. Please tell us more about that.
Thank you very much, Shishir ji, Cchavi ji, and all my friends here. Ladies and gentlemen, all I need to say is that after such erudite enunciation by everyone, there's very little left for me to say, but as an afterword, I would still say that, see, there are, as Professor Muni said, we have been behaving like elder brother. That has been the policy of India. But I also feel that we have spread ourselves too thin. Whereas in our neighborhood, we should have spread ourselves a bit thick. We have given and done things which could have been more substantial. As neighborhood first and our area of influence, what I do in Honduras really doesn't matter, because what I do in Honduras is supporting US cause. It's not supporting my cause. The same project which I have done in Honduras should have been done in Nepal. So what Professor just now said, that there is a young generation, Gen Z, which is looking for employment, which is looking for upgradation of skill, which is looking for entrepreneurship, greater inputs and all. We may have assuaged that. But I am running a project in Honduras. So we have to think on those lines, that where should I spread the butter and for whom? Number one. Number two, as very rightly pointed out by Professor Cholia also, that when we are discussing our neighborhood, we want to lead this because we have led this region for a very long time. We were leading this region from Sri Vijaya Empire to whatever else. Historically, we were the ones, and when you talk about Xinjiang or you talk about Tibet, these were the areas which were influenced by India more than China. China got them later, but the historical part is that India was the lead. But we also realized that we did not have the financial wherewithal, and we were dealing with our own poverty, and a lot of poverty which we imported from our neighbors, and especially the South Asian neighbors, which was earlier Indian subcontinent. Now, if we go back to the history, that how Indian subcontinent name, nomination, or symbolism in Indian subcontinent got changed to South Asia. Who changed it? Where do we first find the reference to South Asia? This was not South Asia. This was Indian subcontinent even when I was studying in my school, which is, you can say, 35 years ago. So 30, 35 years ago, 40 years ago, this was still Indian subcontinent. So within last 20 years plus here and there 5 years, this region becomes South Asia. And this conglomeration becomes SAARC nations. And we very gladly accept it. While SAARC gets funded by India even today, and as I said, we are spreading ourselves too thin. And there's another book which is coming to my mind, and it says, good boys come second. So good boys, we are the elder brothers. We have always used the, our polite and diplomatic conduct and behavior. But I also feel, no matter how much we think about our influence in the region, but we also know our big neighbor is the one who's influencing the policy. And if our big neighbor is influencing the policy, are we collaborating or we are competing? So I'm not going to compete with Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bangladesh, Pakistan. They are not my competitors. But the one I can compete with, or I have the capacity or capability to be a competitor, will that not influence the region? So it's not what I do influences the policy, it's what others will do in the region that gets to be influenced. And what we see in our recent past, I mean, we all understand regime change operations all across and this and that. Uh, could we influence? Could we actually change? Did we have the knowledge? And as very rightly pointed out, that when India has invested so much, and India has invested a lot, whether in terms of energy production, people to people, giving admission in the colleges, students, etc., India has invested immensely, both in neighborhood and the world, because we've always been the good boys. The question still remains, what is missing that we are not able to leverage that? All the people who come here on scholarship, ICCR scholarships and this and that and so on and so forth, there is no mechanism of engaging with them after they have gone back. So we need to engage, use them as our ambassadors. So when I've spent so much of money on your education, you have to serve some purpose for my extension. But that has not happened. So I think when deciding on neighborhood, this was a picture which I saw today of Prime Minister with all the Arab leaders. So I co-tweeted that picture by saying that relationship with the neighbors built on credibility and trust is extended family. So this extended family, because everybody knows we are the good boys, everybody trusts us, and we've seen that in Maldives, in Sri Lanka, everywhere. People know that you can't operate without India's support. But what happened in Nepal, and it's not happened just now, it has been happening for some time. And what was going on in Nepal, I'm sorry to say, but this is not what I did to those people. It is how perceptions are created by the ones who get played by other powers. So when other powers are playing in my region, no matter who, I need to be ready with the counter. While I remain correct in my approach, but the counter of who gets to influence my neighborhood, I think I have every stake in it. While I will not do what has happened in, the Big Brother's neighborhood, we are not, we don't have that temperament, and we will never do that. Is irrespective of which power stays in power or which party stays in power. That's not what India does or will do. At the same time, what's happening in the neighborhood is very much my concern, and that has to be a long-term policy. So I think all the things which we spread ourselves too thin in regions far off should be focused on region close by, and that's where we need to work more sincerely, and that's not criticism, but it's building on what we already do.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi Lekhi ji. You know, the priorities, I think she's talking about priorities. Obviously, we are not yet a global great power. We are not yet a superpower. So therefore, naturally, the ambit or the radius where we need to do our utmost has got to be the neighborhood and the extended neighborhood. And in a way, our foreign aid, if you look at the data, the development assistance, it does show that the neighborhood gets the lion's share. But maybe we could give more, as ma'am is saying, to in more creative ways. We are out of time, but I just want to see if there's anybody in the audience who wants to get in with a quick comment or two before we close. It's kind of late. Yeah, please, if you can raise your hands. In anyone, in any order. Yeah, please go ahead.
First of all, I would like to compliment CRF and congratulate them for bringing out this book. Particularly, I am impressed by the part 2 of the book, where they have discussed about the perception about us in our neighboring countries. It's extremely important for us to know how we are perceived by them. If they perceive us as big brothers, then our saying that we are elder brothers is not good enough. If they perceive us that we are interfering in their internal affairs very blatantly, then again it's a matter of concern for us. And if they feel that we don't treat them with dignity, it's certainly a matter of concern for us. Now, here I will say that if that is the perception in some of our neighboring countries, then how should we react to that? No, we will need to remove that perception. It's not necessary to do many things with the perceived in a very blatant manner. Many things could be done in a more subtle way.
Right, sir.
And there I will say one thing, that we have to distinguish that what things are to be done overtly, what are the things need to be done covertly. We have to make that distinction. It's extremely important, particular our neighbors. So
Right.
that distinction will
Point
have to
well
be made.
taken, but of course we have to go more granular, right? Like the whole country will not have an anti-India sentiment. There'll be certain segments within this population which have anti-India. So we have to be more, discerning of the internal dynamics of these countries. Any other comments or questions? Yes, please go ahead. Can you just come forward and use one of the mics?
Hello, good evening. Maybe just briefly, if some of you can talk about the neighborhood's reactions to the India-EU FTA and maybe the potential impact.
That's a bit of a stretch right now. We can also talk about a couple of our neighboring countries boycotting the Cricket World Cup that's coming up. It's such a shame. Bangladesh is not even going to participate in the World Cup, and then riding piggyback, Pakistan will forfeit the match against India. I mean, this is there are lots of, I've not heard of a World Cup without the participation of these two players. So who is to blame for it? Pakistani reaction seems crazy, but Bangladesh reaction, I think we should have managed it better. But EU India FTA to sports field, there are problems with the neighborhood, and we can go. Anything pointed towards any other panelists? Can we have someone younger, student? Yes, please. Quick questions, please.
Am I audible? Yeah. So a little comment and a question. Like when we speak about neighborhood, we are usually speaking about the subcontinent. We are usually speaking about West Asia. At times when we speak about extended neighborhood, we are going to Southeast Asia. But where is Central Asia in it? Should it be included? Should we have a discourse to perhaps include Central Asia into the scope of or the ambit of our neighborhood?
So anyone wants to take that? Connectivity is the geography is the biggest barrier. Please. Yes, sir, please. Professor Muni, briefly.
No, in fact, I forgot to compliment the book for taking Myanmar as an India's neighbor. Many people don't take it. But then it is only half the compliment, because you should have taken Thailand and Indonesia also. There you have a maritime boundary with them, and maritime boundaries also with Sri Lanka. Therefore, it's creation of Pakistan which has kept us away from Iran. Otherwise, Iran would also be in the neighborhood. Central Asia is a civilization, spillover is there, but civilizational intermeshing is not there. And neither there is a territorial boundary nor there is a maritime boundary. Therefore, it's the American ingenuity that they took Pakistan as an ally and made it a CENTO member, and made it even a what you call the CATO member, Southeast Asia, and told us you are all South Asia. Don't get into these strategic jargons, because the strategic jargons are often used for the interest of the country concerned, power concern.
Any last comment before we close? Yes, a lady in the back, please.
Hello, sir. My name is Pushpa and I am from VIF. So I have a question that I'll just speak in Hindi. सर जो बांग्लादेश में स्टूडेंट अपराइजिंग हुई थी एंड देन द शेख हसीना गवर्नमेंट रिमूवल एंड ऑल, तो उसके बाद में द सो कॉल्ड स्टूडेंट पार्टी emerged, NCP, and after that they joined Jamaat only. So it's just old political game. And in Nepal also, after the Gen Z movement, we are seeing old political faces running for the same elections and then getting negotiating for the seat. So we are just seeing the old pattern re-emerging, but nothing new emerging out of these all these uprising and movements. So India should carefully watch what is happening in the neighborhood, and the internal security for that matter is very
Good
important.
point.
For India. So please.
We sometimes romanticize these uprisings, but unke piche ma'am was talking about operations to remove regimes. And Professor Sriradha Datta has contributed a chapter on Bangladesh. Please read it. Sriradha, you want to quickly say something about, are these student uprisings, or are these just, covers for the same old hideous elements taking over these countries?
There are difficult, some elements taking over, but I would certainly not decry completely the bottom of the ground movement that happened. Of course, for political jostling, it's a different story altogether, and the entire NCP hasn't joined Jamaat, and also there's a power equation here in terms of seat sharing. So I think we need to get into those details before we kind of wash it off, saying that it's a completely extremist elements takeover.
Right, okay. I want to thank all the panelists for sharing valuable insights. Let's give them a big hand, please. And please do read this book. It's comprehensive. There may be certain chapters you like, but then I would say do the mental exercise I did, which is to, especially part 1 and 2, to contrast the the Myanmar chapter written by a Myanmari scholar and by an Indian scholar, the Bhutan chapter written by a Bhutanese scholar and Indian scholar, and to see how we can close the gaps. There are gaps, but it's not as we don't have to be also very regretful or sad about the region, because they're also, like we said, the undercurrents are still there, and the geography, history, and the connectivity, I think in the long run, we still have skin in the game. So but we need to play the game better, and not like, the game which is coming up on the cricket field, where we have two neighbors who are not playing the World Cup with us. So thank you so much. May I now request Cchavi to close?
Yeah, thank you so much. On behalf of Chintan Research Foundation, I want to thank all the distinguished contributors here for generously and rigorously submitting their chapters and accepting everything that we asked for, and all the panelists and discussants for graciously making this event momentful. I request all the authors to please come this side for a group photograph. And there's a dinner next door, so post the event, we can go for the dinner.
Only authors by self, you know who are the writers, right? So requesting only the chapter contributors to come over this side. With discussion, okay, we are.
That's afterwards.
We just make the cut.